I'm Eleanor, 34 years old, and work as a marketing executive in Boston. Growing up in a beautiful colonial home in Massachusetts filled me with cherished memories, but I always felt second best compared to my sister Sophia. When my parents decided to give our childhood home to her, I was shocked. Then came the real bombshell. They expected me to move back in and pay my own sister rent. The betrayal cut deep. Before I tell you how this family drama unfolded, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt overlooked by your family. Our family home was a stunning colonial built in the 1920s with 4 spacious bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and majestic maple trees lining the long driveway. This house in Lexington, Massachusetts, wasn't just a structure of wood and brick. It was where every birthday, holiday, and milestone happened. I could still point to the doorframe in the kitchen with faded pencil marks tracking our growth, or the loose floorboard in the upstairs hallway that always creaked no matter how carefully you stepped. My father, James, was a finance professor at Boston University, a tall man with salt and pepper hair who spoke with the same measured precision, whether lecturing students or explaining why we couldn't get a puppy. He believed in structured discipline and the power of compound interest lessons he tried to instill in us from an early age. Dad had high expectations, especially when it came to academics, and his approval wasn't easily earned. My mother, Martha, in contrast, was a devoted homemaker with a creative streak. She filled our home with handmade quilts, watercolor paintings, and the constant aroma of something delicious baking in the oven. With her warm smile and gentle hands, she was the emotional center of our family. Yet even with her nurturing nature, there was always a subtle bias in how she viewed her daughters. Sophia, my sister, was 3 years older and seemed to have been born with all the qualities my parents valued. She brought home straight A's without seeming to try, played violin beautifully, and had the kind of natural social grace that made her popular with both peers and adults. Sophia was the daughter who followed all the rules, who never missed curfew, who made our parents beam with pride at every parent-teacher conference. I, on the other hand, was more of a wild card. While I did well in school, I wasn't the academic prodigy Sophia was. My interests lay elsewhere. I was drawn to the emerging world of digital media and marketing, spending hours on our family computer, teaching myself design programs, and building primitive websites when most kids my age were hanging out at the mall. The pattern of favoritism was subtle but consistent throughout our childhood. When Sophia won first place in the state science fair, my parents threw a dinner party and invited the extended family. When I was elected president of the school marketing club, it warranted only a brief congratulations over dinner. Dad would rearrange his schedule to attend Sophia's violin recitals, but often missed my soccer games due to work commitments. The Christmas Sophia got accepted to Harvard, she received a brand new car. The following year, when I got into NYU, I received luggage because it was practical for my move to New York. I don't think my parents ever realized how obvious their preference was or how much it hurt. Maybe they simply resonated more with Sophia's temperament and interests. Or perhaps once they established her as the golden child, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, with each of us falling deeper into our assigned roles within the family. College was my escape. While Sophia stayed close to home attending Harvard and visiting our parents every weekend, I embraced the energy and opportunities of New York City. At NYU, I discovered my talent for digital marketing, thriving in an environment that valued innovation and creative thinking. I found friends who appreciated my quirks and ambitions, who didn't compare me to a perfect older sister. After graduation, I landed a job at a boutique marketing agency in Manhattan, working with exciting new tech startups. I was building my own life, making my own money, and slowly healing from the subtle wounds of my childhood. I dated, made friends, explored the city, and called home just enough to maintain the relationship without reopening old hurts. 8 years into my New York life, Dad had a minor heart attack. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough to serve as a wake-up call. I found myself drawn back to Massachusetts, suddenly aware of my parents' mortality and the possibility of regret if I maintained emotional distance. I transferred to the Boston office of my agency, moving into a small but charming apartment in Cambridge. Being close to family again had its challenges. The old dynamics resurfaced almost immediately, with Sophia still occupying her place as the favored daughter. Now married to Daniel, a successful surgeon with 2 beautiful children, she seemed to have followed the exact life script my parents had envisioned. They lived in an upscale neighborhood just 15 minutes from our parents, with Sophia working part-time as a consultant while primarily focusing on raising her children. As my parents entered their 70s, the discussion of their estate and the future of the family home began to surface in conversations. The house had been in the family for 3 generations and held significant financial and emotional value. I assumed the property would either be split between Sophia and me or sold with the proceeds divided equally. After all, regardless of who had been the favorite child, we were both their daughters. I couldn't have imagined how wrong I was. The evening started like any other family dinner. Mom had prepared her famous pot roast with roasted potatoes and apple pie for dessert. The dining room was warm and familiar, with the same floral wallpaper and cherry wood table that had witnessed countless family meals. Dad opened a bottle of Merlot, filling crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts to my parents almost 40 years ago. Sophia and Daniel arrived first with their children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Liam, who immediately showed me their latest school art projects. I brought a bouquet of fresh flowers for Mom and a bottle of scotch for Dad. We settled into our usual places at the table, the children at a small adjacent table that had once been where Sophia and I sat during holidays when the adults needed their own space. The conversation flowed naturally through the meal, covering the children's activities, local politics, and neighborhood news. Dad seemed in good spirits despite his recent health concerns, and Mom was clearly enjoying having everyone together. It wasn't until she served coffee and pie that I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, and Dad cleared his throat in the way he always did before making an announcement. "Girls, your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future." He began, his voice taking on the professorial tone I recognized from childhood. "With my health scare, we've realized we need to get our affairs in order, including decisions about the house." I nodded, feeling a slight tension build in my shoulders. This was the conversation I had been expecting but dreading. "We've talked to our lawyer and financial advisor," Mom added, placing her hand over Dad's, "and we've made some decisions we wanted to share with you both." Dad took a sip of water, then continued, "We've decided that the house will go to Sophia." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning fully registered. Not, "Sophia will have first option to buy it," or "Sophia will get a slightly larger share." The house would go to Sophia. Period. I looked at my sister, whose expression shifted from surprise to a poorly concealed satisfaction. She reached for Daniel's hand under the table. "Thank you," Sophia said, her voice soft. "That means so much to us." I struggled to maintain my composure, my mind racing to process this information. "The whole house?" I finally managed to ask. "What do you mean exactly?" Dad adjusted his glasses a habit when he was preparing to explain something he considered obvious. "We've already transferred the deed to Sophia's name. The house is hers now, though. Of course, we'll continue living here as long as we can manage independently." "I see," I said, though I didn't see it all. "May I ask why?" Mom jumped in, perhaps sensing my distress. "Sophia has always been more attached to the house, Eleanor. She stayed local, brings the children over every weekend. The house makes sense for her family with the big yard and all the bedrooms." "And what about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, despite the knot forming in my throat. "Did you consider that I might also have an attachment to our family home?" Dad's expression hardened slightly. "Be practical, Eleanor. You built your life in New York. Even though you're back in Boston now, you have your career, your apartment. Sophia is raising a family. She needs the stability and space the house provides." I looked around the table at their faces. Dad's matter-of-fact expression, Mom's pleading eyes, Sophia's barely concealed triumph, Daniel's studied neutrality. I felt like I was in some bizarre play where everyone knew their lines except me. "We're not trying to be unfair," Mom added quickly. "We know the house has value, but our retirement accounts will be split evenly between you both." I later learned this wasn't exactly true, but in that moment, I was still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that our family home, worth close to $850,000, was being given entirely to my sister. "Actually," Dad said, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, "that brings us to another matter we wanted to discuss." I braced myself, wondering what other bombshell was coming. "Eleanor, your lease in Cambridge is up in 3 months, isn't it?" Mom asked. I nodded, surprised she had remembered that detail from a previous conversation. "Well," she continued, smiling as if offering a wonderful solution, "we thought you might consider moving back home. There's plenty of space and it would be lovely to have you close by." For a brief, disorienting moment, I thought they were suggesting I move back into the family home while they still lived there. But the reality was far more shocking. Dad leaned forward. What your mother is saying is that once the renovations Sophia has planned are complete, you could rent your old bedroom and bathroom from her. It would be much more affordable than Cambridge prices, and you could save for your own place eventually. I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to pay rent to live in my childhood bedroom, in the house you just gave to Sophia for free? Sophia interjected, her voice carrying that placating tone she used when trying to smooth over conflict. We would give you family rates, of course. It would be win-win. You'd save money, and the rental income would help us maintain the property. I looked around the table again, searching for any sign that this was an elaborate joke. There was none. They were completely serious. So let me understand this correctly, I said slowly. Sophia gets a nearly $1 million house for free, and I get to pay her to live in a bedroom I grew up in. Dad's expression darkened. I think you're being unnecessarily difficult, Eleanor. We're trying to help you. Help me, I repeated, unable to keep the incredulity from my voice. Yes, Mom insisted. Boston real estate is so expensive. This way you could save money while still having your independence. The conversation continued in circles with my parents and Sophia, presenting their plan as a generous offer rather than the insulting proposition it was. Daniel remained tactfully silent, occasionally shooting me glances that might have contained a hint of sympathy. Eventually, I excused myself, claiming I needed to get home to prepare for an early meeting the next day. I hugged my parents stiffly, nodded to Daniel, and gave brief hugs to my niece and nephew, who remained blissfully unaware of the tension permeating the adult table. As I drove home, tears blurred my vision, forcing me to pull over on a quiet street. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. It wasn't just about the monetary value of the house, though, that certainly mattered. It was the blatant message that Sophia deserved this gift, while I deserved to pay rent. It was confirmation of what I had felt my entire life. In my family's eyes, I would always be second best. The drive back to my apartment in Cambridge was a blur. Rain had started to fall, mirroring the storm inside me. I parked haphazardly, barely registering the walk to my third-floor unit. Once inside, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto my sofa, still wearing my coat. The magnitude of what had just happened washed over me in waves. Our family home, the place where I had taken my first steps, lost my first tooth, and dreamed my first dreams had been given entirely to Sophia. Not sold to her, not split between us, but handed over like a casual gift. And then, to add insult to injury, they expected me to pay rent to my sister for the privilege of living in my own childhood home. As the shock began to fade, memories flooded back unbidden. I remembered the Christmas when Sophia received the latest iPhone while I got a generic brand tablet. The time Dad drove 2 hours to rescue Sophia when her car broke down, but suggested I take an Uber when I faced the same situation. The family vacation photos where Sophia was front and center, while I was often at the edge of the frame or behind the camera. Each memory carried a fresh sting, now forming a pattern I had tried for years to dismiss as coincidence or oversensitivity. But there was no denying it anymore. My parents had always valued Sophia more, and tonight was just the culmination of a lifetime of preferential treatment. I reached for my phone and called Jasmine, my best friend since college days. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I explained the situation. "That's beyond favoritism, Eleanor. That's just wrong." "Am I overreacting?" I asked, desperate for an outside perspective. "Maybe there's something I'm missing here." "Absolutely not." Jasmine's voice was firm. "This isn't about you being sensitive. This is about your parents making an objectively unfair decision and then expecting you to be grateful for the chance to pay rent to your sister. Anyone would be upset." Her validation released something in me, and I found myself crying for the first time since leaving the dinner. Not delicate tears, but ugly, gulping sobs that left me gasping for breath. "I always knew they favored her." I managed between sobs, but I never thought they would be this blatant about it. Jasmine stayed on the phone with me for hours, listening as I unpacked decades of subtle and not-so-subtle favoritism. By the time we hung up, it was past midnight, but sleep remained elusive. I lay in bed, replaying the dinner conversation, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the questions I should have asked. Morning came with the harsh ping of text notifications. A message from Mom. "Hope you slept well, dear. Let's talk more about the housing arrangement when you have time." As if we had been discussing something as trivial as carpooling arrangements. Another from Sophia. "Sorry if last night was awkward. We really do think this could work out great for everyone. Daniel and I would love to have you close by, and the kids adore their Aunt Eleanor." Not a hint of acknowledgement from either of them that anything about the situation might be unfair or hurtful to me. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. Amanda, my boss, was understanding, telling me to take care of myself. If only my family showed the same consideration. Alone in my apartment, I tried to look objectively at where I stood. Despite feeling emotionally blindsided, I forced myself to focus on facts. I had built a successful career in digital marketing, rising to become an account director at one of Boston's top agencies. I managed campaigns for major brands and had a reputation for innovative strategies that delivered results. My salary was substantial, though living in Boston meant high expenses, and I still carried student loan debt from NYU. I had friends, a job I loved, and had created a life that was meaningful to me, all with minimal support from my parents. In fact, when I thought about it, I had accomplished everything, despite their constant comparison to Sophia, their dismissal of my interests, and their limited emotional investment in my path. By contrast, Sophia had followed the path of least resistance. She'd attended her parents' alma mater, married young to a man they approved of, and settled just minutes from their home. She'd even chosen part-time work to focus on family, just as our mother had. While these weren't wrong choices, they were certainly the ones that earned our parents' validation and apparently their financial support as well. Curiosity drove me to research property values in Lexington. Our family home, with its historical charm and desirable location, would easily sell for $850,000 in the current market. That was the gift Sophia had just received while I was being offered the opportunity to pay her hundreds of dollars monthly for a bedroom. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about money, though, that certainly mattered. It was about the message being sent. Sophia deserved this windfall, simply for being Sophia, while I should be grateful for the chance to financially support the very system that excluded me. By afternoon, my sadness had crystallized into resolve. I would not be moving into my childhood home to pay rent to my sister. I would not pretend this arrangement was acceptable or fair. And most importantly, I would not remain silent about how this made me feel. My parents needed to understand the impact of their decision, not just on my financial situation, but on our relationship. I would confront them directly, calmly but firmly. No more brushing things under the rug, no more accepting scraps of affection while Sophia received the feast. I texted my father, "We need to talk about the house situation. Can we meet tomorrow, just the three of us?" Better to have this conversation without Sophia present, without her children as a buffer or distraction. His reply came quickly. "All right. Lunch at Rosetta's at noon." Rosetta's was their favorite Italian restaurant, a neutral territory for what promised to be a difficult conversation. I confirmed the time and spent the rest of the evening preparing what I wanted to say, determined that this time my voice would be heard. Rosetta's hadn't changed in years. The same red checkered tablecloths, the same framed photos of the Italian countryside, the same scent of garlic and tomato sauce permeating the air. I arrived early, requesting a corner table for privacy. My parents walked in exactly at noon, my father checking his watch as they entered, punctual as always. Mom embraced me warmly, while Dad offered a perfunctory pat on the shoulder. They settled across from me, Mom immediately commenting on my appearance. "You look tired, Eleanor. Are you getting enough sleep?" I ignored the question, waiting until after the waiter had taken our orders and brought water to the table before addressing the reason for our meeting. "I want to talk about your decision regarding the family home." I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've had some time to think about it, and I need you both to understand how it affects me." Dad sighed, already looking impatient. "We've made our decision, Eleanor. The deed has already been transferred to Sophia." "I understand that," I said, "but I want to talk about why you made that decision and why you thought asking me to pay rent to Sophia would be acceptable." "It's a practical solution," Dad insisted. "Rents in Cambridge are astronomical. You'd be saving money." "That's not the point," I countered. "The point is that you've given Sophia a massive financial gift while offering me nothing comparable. In fact, you're suggesting I should pay her, effectively increasing the value of your gift to her while putting me at a further disadvantage." Mom looked uncomfortable. "We're not trying to play favorites, Eleanor." "Aren't you?" I asked, maintaining eye contact. "Because from my perspective, this is just the latest and most extreme example of how you've always favored Sophia." "That's ridiculous," Dad dismissed. "We've supported both of you equally." I had come prepared for this denial. "Have you? When Sophia was accepted to Harvard, you bought her a car. When I got into NYU, I received luggage. Sophia's violin lessons continued through high school, despite her minimal interest, while my request for a photography course was denied as impractical. You've attended every single one of her children's birthday parties, but missed my graduate school graduation because it conflicted with your anniversary trip, which could have been rescheduled. I paused, watching their reactions. Mom looked stricken, but Dad's expression had hardened. "You're being too sensitive," he said. "Those are completely different situations." "They form a pattern," I insisted. "A pattern where Sophia's needs, achievements, and desires are prioritized over mine. And now you've given her a house worth nearly $1 million while suggesting I should be grateful for the opportunity to pay her rent." The waiter arrived with our meals, creating an awkward pause in the conversation. None of us touched our food. "Eleanor," Mom began once we were alone again, "we love you both equally, but Sophia has different needs. She has children to consider, a family to raise. And I don't matter because I'm single, because I chose a career instead of marriage at 25, because I moved away to pursue opportunities instead of staying close to home." "That's not what we're saying," Dad interjected, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Then what are you saying? Help me understand why Sophia deserves this level of financial support while I'm expected to pay her for access to a home I grew up in just as much as she did." Dad set down his fork with more force than necessary. "The fact that you're making this all about money shows a certain lack of family values, Eleanor." I refused to be baited. "This isn't just about money, though. That certainly matters. It's about fairness, about recognition, about feeling valued in this family." The conversation continued in circles with my parents, offering various justifications that all circled back to the same core belief: Sophia deserved more because she had followed their preferred life path. Then Dad dropped another bombshell. "Since we're discussing financial matters, you should know we've also adjusted our retirement accounts and investments. Sophia will receive approximately 70%, with 30% allocated to you." The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. 70%? On what basis? "Sophia needs it more," Mom explained softly. "With the children's education to consider and her limited income working part-time." "So I'm being penalized for being financially independent?" I asked, incredulity rising. "For working hard and building a career?" "No one is being penalized," Dad insisted. "We're allocating resources where they're most needed. Did it occur to you that I might have children someday, that I might want to buy a home but am hindered by student debt from the education you encouraged me to pursue, that treating your children this unequally sends a clear message about how you value us?" Dad's face flushed with anger. "You're being ungrateful, Eleanor, after everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me that compares to giving Sophia a house and 70% of your retirement funds?" I challenged. The question hung in the air between us. Mom looked close to tears, while Dad's expression had turned thunderous. "I've made my position clear," I continued when neither responded. "I will not be moving into the family home to pay rent to Sophia. That arrangement is insulting and unfair, and I won't pretend otherwise to preserve family harmony." "You've always been difficult," Dad muttered. "Always questioning, always challenging." "Because someone needed to question this dynamic," I replied. "Someone needed to point out the constant favoritism." Dad pushed back his chair. "If you can't accept our decisions and be civil about this, perhaps we need some distance." The ultimatum was clear: accept their unfair treatment or risk damaging our relationship further. "I love you both," I said, meaning it despite everything. "But I deserve to be treated fairly, and I won't accept less anymore." I left the restaurant with my head high, even as tears threatened. This confrontation had been necessary, but the pain of having my worst fears confirmed cut deep. My parents didn't just favor Sophia. They believed she was more deserving, more valuable, more worthy of support. The walk to my car had never felt longer. Each step carrying the weight of a difficult truth standing up for myself might cost me my family, but remaining silent would cost me something even more precious: my self-respect. The days following the confrontation at Rosetta's unfolded in uncomfortable silence. No calls or texts from my parents, no updates on family matters. The absence of communication spoke volumes about their response to my standing firm. On the fourth day, my phone lit up with Sophia's name. I almost let it go to voicemail, but decided it was better to face whatever was coming. "Eleanor, what did you say to Mom and Dad?" she demanded without preamble. "Mom's been crying and Dad's in one of his moods." "I told them exactly how I feel about their decision to give you the house and the majority of their retirement funds," I replied evenly. and that I won't be paying you rent to live in my childhood bedroom." Sophia sighed dramatically. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. I'm caught in the middle here." "Are you really in the middle, Sophia? Because from where I'm standing, you're firmly on the winning side with a free house and most of our parents' assets." "That's not fair," she protested. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Did you refuse it?" I challenged. "Did you suggest they split things more equitably?" Her silence answered my question. "Look," she finally said, her voice taking on the condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. "I have a family to consider. The house makes sense for us with the kids and everything. And I don't matter because I'm single, because I chose a different path." "Of course you matter," she insisted, though her tone lacked conviction. "But you have to admit your life is different. You have your career, your independence." "My independence shouldn't be punished, Sophia. My career success shouldn't mean I deserve less support from our parents." The conversation ended with nothing resolved, Sophia clearly believing I was being unreasonable while I remained firm in my position. Within days, the situation escalated further as extended family members began reaching out, obviously having heard one side of the story. Aunt Rachel, Mom's sister, sent a lengthy email about the importance of family harmony and accepting parents' decisions with grace. Uncle Paul, Dad's brother, called to tell me how disappointed he was in my materialistic attitude. Surprisingly, Aunt Margaret, Dad's sister, who had always been something of a family rebel, reached out with a different message. "Stand your ground, Eleanor," she told me during our phone conversation. "What they're doing isn't right, and someone needs to say so." Her support was unexpected, but deeply appreciated during a time when I felt increasingly isolated from my family. The family group chat, once filled with innocuous updates and holiday planning, became a battleground of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled criticisms. Cousins who had no direct stake in the situation felt free to weigh in, most siding with my parents, and Sophia, simply because maintaining the status quo was easier than acknowledging the inequity. Then came the email from Dad, a 3-page manifesto listing every expense they had ever incurred on my behalf, from private piano lessons in elementary school to the portion of my undergraduate tuition they had covered. The message was clear: I was indebted to them, not the other way around. Mom took a different approach, sending tearful voice messages about how family should be the priority, how life was too short for conflict, how she just wanted her daughters to get along. The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective, leaving me feeling guilty, despite knowing I had every right to stand up for myself. Meanwhile, Sophia seemed determined to proceed as if nothing had changed. She sent me photos of renovation plans for the house, including changes to my childhood bedroom, to make it a more appropriate rental unit. She mentioned removing the window seat I had loved, where I spent countless hours reading and dreaming, to make space for a more efficient desk area. "Let me know if you have any preferences for the new fixtures," she texted, as if I had already agreed to the arrangement, "since you'll be the one living with them." The pressure was relentless, and coming from all sides. Every day brought new attempts to make me acquiesce, to accept the unacceptable, to prioritize family peace over fairness and self-respect. Work became my sanctuary, the one place where my value was recognized and rewarded based on merit rather than family position. But even there, the stress began to take its toll. I missed deadlines, fumbled during client presentations, and found myself staring blankly at my computer screen more often than not. Amanda, my boss, called me into her office after I mishandled a major client call. I expected a reprimand, but instead found concern. "What's going on, Eleanor?" she asked after closing the door. "This isn't like you." Something about her genuine concern broke through the walls I'd been maintaining, and I found myself explaining the whole situation. The family home, the rental proposal, the confrontation, the ongoing pressure campaign. "That's outrageous," she said when I finished. "No wonder you've been distracted." "I'm sorry about my performance," I began, but she waved it away. "Take the rest of the week off," she said firmly. "Clear your head, get some perspective, your projects will be covered." Her understanding was a stark contrast to my family's response, highlighting just how unreasonable their expectations were. That evening, seeking broader perspective, I anonymously posted about my situation on a financial advice forum. The response was overwhelming and unanimous. What my parents were doing was unfair, and I was right to refuse the rental arrangement. "Your parents are setting up a lifetime of resentment between siblings," one commenter wrote. "They've already given your sister an $850,000 gift. Stand firm on not paying her rent on top of that," advised another. The validation from strangers was both comforting and disturbing. If people with no emotional investment could immediately see the injustice of the situation, why couldn't my own family? Unfortunately, my post gained more traction than I anticipated. Someone shared it on social media, and within days it had gone viral. While I had been careful to keep details vague, my parents somehow discovered it and were furious about what they perceived as public humiliation. The tension reached a breaking point when Sophia sent official floor plans and a rental agreement drafted by her husband's lawyer friend. The document outlined terms including a $1,200 monthly rent for the bedroom and private bathroom usage rights for common areas and restrictions on guests and modifications to the space. It was the final straw. I blocked both my parents and Sophia on my phone, needing space to think without their constant pressure. The immediate silence was both painful and liberating, like lancing a wound to allow healing to begin. The temporary silence created by blocking my family allowed me to think clearly for the first time since that fateful dinner. I needed professional advice about my financial situation and future, so I scheduled an appointment with Lisa Chen, a financial advisor recommended by Amanda. Lisa's office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. She greeted me warmly, offering coffee before getting down to business. "So," she said once we were settled, "tell me what brings you in today." I explained the situation with my family, the house, and my concerns about my financial future, given the unequal distribution of family assets. "That's a difficult situation," she acknowledged. "But before we discuss your family's assets, let's look at your own financial picture. That's something you have direct control over." We spent the next hour reviewing my income expenses, savings, investments, and debt. I had been diligent about contributing to my 401k, had built a modest emergency fund, and was steadily paying down my student loans. My credit score was excellent, and my income had increased consistently over the years. "You're actually in a stronger position than you might think," Lisa said, looking over the spreadsheets we had created. "Your salary puts you in the top 20% of earners for your age group in Boston, and you've been smart about managing your money. But compared to my sister who just received a house worth close to $1 million, I began. "Let's focus on your situation, not hers," Lisa suggested firmly. "The question isn't whether you've been treated fairly by your parents, that's clear, but rather what your next steps should be to secure your own financial future." She outlined several options, but one stood out immediately. Instead of paying rent to my sister, I could use that same money toward a mortgage on my own property. "With your income and credit score, you could qualify for a very reasonable mortgage," she explained. "And there are several first-time homebuyer programs that might reduce your down payment requirements." The idea took root immediately. Having my own home would provide not just financial equity, but also emotional equity, a space that was truly mine, where family dynamics couldn't intrude. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into researching properties. The Boston market was expensive, but Cambridge had some promising options, particularly in up-and-coming neighborhoods. I connected with a realtor who specialized in first-time buyers and began viewing condominiums that fit my budget. The fifth property we viewed was perfect, a two-bedroom condo in a converted Victorian in East Cambridge. It needed some cosmetic updates, but had beautiful original hardwood floors, high ceilings, and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. At $650,000, it would stretch my budget, but the mortgage payments would actually be less than what Sophia had proposed charging for rent. Making an offer was terrifying. This was by far the biggest financial commitment I had ever made, and I was doing it entirely on my own without the family support most people my age could count on. But it also felt empowering, a declaration of independence from the family dynamics that had constrained me for so long. The waiting period after submitting the offer was excruciating. I checked my phone, constantly jumped every time it rang, and slept poorly, my mind racing with possibilities both exciting and frightening. When the call finally came, I was in the middle of a client meeting and had to excuse myself to answer. "They accepted your offer," my realtor announced. "Congratulations, you're going to be a homeowner." The relief and joy that washed over me was unlike anything I had experienced before. This was more than a property purchase. It was a reclamation of my worth, a tangible statement that I deserved a home of my own, not a rented bedroom in the house my parents had given to my sister. I reached out to Jasmine first, who screamed with excitement and immediately offered to help with painting and decorating. My colleagues at work organized an impromptu champagne celebration when I shared the news. These people, my chosen family, had more genuine happiness for my achievement than my biological family had shown in years. Word travels fast in family circles, and it wasn't long before my parents learned about my purchase through mutual friends. Dad called almost immediately after unblocking my number, his voice tight with controlled anger. "A $650,000 condo. Have you lost your mind? That's an impulsive, irresponsible decision." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I consulted with a financial advisor who confirmed it's within my budget. The mortgage payments are less than what Sophia wanted to charge for rent." "That's beside the point," he insisted. "You should have discussed this with us first. Why you didn't discuss giving the family home to Sophia with me?" That silenced him momentarily, but he quickly recovered. "We're your parents, Eleanor. We don't need your permission for our estate planning." "And I'm an adult who doesn't need your permission for my housing decisions," I countered. Mom called next, her approach more emotional. "We're just worried you're throwing money away on a spite purchase," she said, her voice wavering. "This seems like such a reaction to the situation with Sophia." "It's not a spite purchase, Mom. It's an investment in my future. And yes, it was prompted by the situation with Sophia, but that doesn't make it wrong." Sophia's response came as a text. "Heard about your condo. Guess this means you won't be moving back home after all. The kids will be disappointed not to have their aunt close by." I didn't dignify it with a response. As closing day approached, the reality of homeownership began to sink in. There were inspections to schedule, insurance policies to purchase, moving arrangements to make. Each step took me further from the family dynamic that had defined me for so long and closer to a life of my own creation. The weekend before closing, I received an unexpected visitor. Aunt Margaret, Dad's sister, appeared at my apartment door with a large wrapped package. "I heard you're becoming a homeowner," she said, enveloping me in a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you." We settled in my small living room with tea, and she explained her visit. "I brought you something I think should be yours," she said, nudging the package toward me. Inside was a stunning antique mirror that had hung in our family home's entryway for generations, a piece I had always admired for its ornate gold frame and slightly mottled glass that seemed to hold the reflections of everyone who had ever passed by. "But this is from the house," I said, confused. "How did you get it?" "Your mother called me last week upset about your condo purchase," Aunt Margaret explained. "She mentioned that Sophia was redecorating and didn't want some of the older pieces. I asked if I could have this for my hallway, and she agreed immediately." She smiled mischievously. "But I always intended it for you. This mirror should be in your new home where it belongs." Tears welled in my eyes at this unexpected act of solidarity. "Thank you," I managed to say. "This means more than you know." Aunt Margaret stayed for hours sharing stories I'd never heard about family dynamics that stretched back generations. It turned out that my father and his brother had experienced a similar pattern of favoritism from their parents, with my uncle receiving preferential treatment while my father was expected to be more self-sufficient. "The pattern repeats unless someone breaks it," Aunt Margaret observed. "You're breaking it, Eleanor, by refusing to accept less than you deserve. That takes courage." Her words gave me a new perspective on the situation. Perhaps my father's treatment of me wasn't just about favoring Sophia, but was also rooted in his own experiences of family inequity. Understanding this didn't excuse his actions, but it helped me see them as part of a larger pattern rather than a personal rejection. As Aunt Margaret prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly. "Your new home will be filled with love because you'll fill it with people who truly value you," she said. "Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into." Her visit and her gift were unexpected bright spots in an otherwise challenging time. The antique mirror would be the first thing I hung in my new home, a connection to my past that I was reclaiming on my own terms. That evening, I made another important decision. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Brennan, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. If I was going to break generational patterns and build a healthier relationship with my family, even at a distance, I needed professional guidance to process decades of subtle and not so subtle favoritism. The path forward wasn't clear, but for the first time I felt I was walking it with confidence rather than confusion, with determination rather than doubt. Whatever happened with my family relationships, I was creating a home of my own, a place where I would never be second best. 6 months after moving into my condo, the chaos of the initial transition had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The cosmetic updates were complete, with fresh paint in soothing blues and greens, replacing the previous owner's beige palette. The antique mirror from Aunt Margaret hung proudly in the entryway, greeting visitors with its slightly wavering reflection. My living room featured a comfortable sectional where friends gathered for movie nights, and the small second bedroom had been transformed into a home office where I occasionally worked remotely. More importantly, I had established a new relationship with myself, one built on self-respect and boundaries, rather than the constant seeking of approval that had characterized much of my life. Regular sessions with Dr. Brennan had helped me understand the deep roots of family dynamics and my responses to them. Family patterns are powerful, she had explained during one particularly insightful session. They're like rivers that have been flowing in the same direction for generations, carving deeper channels with each passing year. Changing their course requires sustained effort and the willingness to endure temporary discomfort. That temporary discomfort had included limited contact with my parents, conducted entirely on my terms. No more rushing to answer their calls, no more rearranging my schedule to accommodate their expectations, no more accepting subtle put-downs or comparisons to Sophia. Our interactions were now structured and boundaried, taking place primarily through scheduled phone calls every other Sunday. The initial calls had been tense with my parents, clearly uncomfortable with the new dynamic. Dad would attempt to reassert control through financial advice I hadn't requested or comments about my career choices. Mom would try emotional appeals about family togetherness. I learned to redirect these conversations calmly but firmly, ending calls early if necessary when boundaries were crossed. Sophia and I had established an even more distant relationship, communicating primarily about practical matters related to our parents or occasions involving her children, whom I still wanted a relationship with, despite the tension with their mother. Emma and Liam, now 9 and 7, were innocent parties in the adult conflict, and I made sure they knew their Aunt Eleanor loved them unconditionally. "Aunt Eleanor, when are you coming to visit?" Emma had asked during a video call the previous week. "I miss showing you my art projects." "I miss that too, sweetheart," I had responded truthfully. "How about we plan a special day next weekend I could pick you up, and we could visit the Children's Museum downtown?" These outings with my niece and nephew became a regular fixture, carefully scheduled when Sophia and Daniel had other commitments, so I could connect with the children without the tension of adult interactions. These precious hours gave me hope that the next generation might escape the damaging patterns of favoritism and conditional love that had marked my childhood. The careful peace was disrupted in early spring when Mom experienced a health scare, a minor stroke, that required hospitalization. I received the news via text from Sophia. "Mom in hospital, mild stroke, stable but scared." I drove to the hospital immediately, anxiety churning in my stomach. The familiar corridors of Massachusetts General Hospital felt both clinical and charged with emotion as I made my way to Mom's room. She looked smaller somehow in the hospital bed. Her usually perfect hair disheveled her face, pale but alert. Dad sat beside her, his posture rigid with stress, while Sophia arranged flowers on the windowsill. The tableau of family roles was so familiar it was almost comical. Sophia caring for appearances, Dad maintaining control, and me arriving slightly out of step with the established rhythm. "Eleanor," Mom said, her voice weaker than usual but her eyes brightening. "You came." "Of course I came," I replied, moving to her bedside and taking her hand. "How are you feeling?" The conversation that followed was stilted but civil, focusing on medical details and recovery plans rather than the underlying tension. Yet something had shifted subtly in the family dynamic. My parents' mortality, always an abstract concept, had suddenly become concrete, casting our conflicts in a different light. As visiting hours ended, Dad walked me to the parking garage, an unexpected gesture that left us momentarily alone. "Your mother was asking for you," he said after a prolonged silence. "Before they gave her the medication. She was confused, but she kept saying we needed to call Eleanor." I wasn't sure how to respond to this information, so I simply nodded. "It makes you think," he continued, staring ahead rather than at me, "about what matters in the end." It wasn't an apology or even an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but it was perhaps the beginning of a recognition that relationships matter more than property or principles. We parted with an awkward half-hug, more physical contact than we'd had in months. Mom recovered well, returning home after 3 days with a new regimen of medications and a renewed appreciation for life's fragility. The experience seemed to soften some of the hard edges of our family conflict, creating small openings for connection without erasing the underlying issues. As Christmas approached, the question of family gatherings loomed large. In previous years, the holiday had been celebrated at the family home, now Sophia's home, with everyone staying overnight and participating in long-standing traditions. This year, after considerable thought and discussion with Dr. Brennan, I decided to attend the Christmas Eve dinner but stay at a nearby hotel rather than in the house. "You're setting a boundary, not rejecting your family," Dr. Brennan had reminded me. "This is about creating a relationship that works for you now, not punishing them for past hurts." The holiday gathering was awkward, but not disastrous. Sophia had decorated elaborately, the house transformed with twinkling lights, garlands, and a 12-foot tree in the front window. The familiar rooms now contained different furniture, different color schemes, different energy, making it easier to see it as my sister's home rather than the stolen family property. I brought thoughtful gifts for everyone and maintained pleasant conversation throughout dinner, focusing on neutral topics like the children's school activities and local news. When Emma proudly showed me her room, formerly the guest room, I admired her decorations without mentioning my own history in the house. When Dad attempted to broach financial topics, I smoothly changed the subject. When Mom became tearful about my decision to stay at a hotel, I held her hand and assured her it wasn't personal, but simply what worked best for me. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I left that evening feeling strong rather than diminished, clear about my worth, regardless of my family's ability to recognize it. The new year brought unexpected developments. A promotion at work gave me additional responsibilities and a significant salary increase. Sophia, surprising everyone, decided to return to work full-time, accepting a position as development director at a local nonprofit. Mom joined a seniors art class and began exhibiting her paintings at community events. Dad started playing golf, something he had always dismissed as a waste of time during his working years. These changes created new conversation topics during our limited interactions, allowing us to engage as evolving adults rather than fixed characters in an old family drama. Spring arrived with another milestone. I invited my family to my condo for Sunday brunch, the first time I had hosted them in my new home. The invitation was both a peace offering and a statement I had created a beautiful space of my own, one that reflected my taste and priorities, one where I was in control. The visit began stiffly, with Dad examining everything with a critical eye and Mom bringing housewarming gifts I had neither requested nor needed. But as the meal progressed, the atmosphere gradually relaxed. Dad commented favorably on the neighborhood's property values, his version of approval. Mom admired my decorating choices, particularly the display of black and white photographs I had taken during travels. Even Sophia offered a genuine compliment about the natural light in the living room. The most significant moment came as they were preparing to leave. Dad paused in the entryway, noticing the antique mirror for the first time. "Isn't that—" he began, his brow furrowing. "From the family home, yes," I confirmed. "Aunt Margaret gave it to me as a housewarming gift." He studied it for a long moment, emotions crossing his face too quickly to interpret. Finally, he nodded. "It looks right here," he said simply. It wasn't the apology I had once craved, nor the full recognition of the injustice I had experienced, but it was an acknowledgement, however small, that I too deserved a piece of our family history, that my home mattered, that I mattered. Later that week, Sophia called with an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking," she said, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant, "about the house and everything that happened." I braced myself, unsure where this was heading. "The kids keep asking why you never stay overnight when you visit," she continued, "and it got me thinking about how this all must feel from your perspective." Again, not quite an apology, but an attempt at empathy that had been notably absent before. "I can't change Mom and Dad's decision," she said. "But Daniel and I have been talking, and we'd like to set up a college fund for your future children, a significant one. It's not the same as property, but it's something that might help balance things a bit." The offer caught me completely off guard. "That's unexpected," I managed to say. "Is it a bad idea?" she asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice. "No, not bad," I replied carefully. "Just unexpected. Can I think about it?" "Of course," she agreed readily. "Take all the time you need." That evening I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, contemplating Sophia's offer. It wasn't perfect, it didn't erase the past, and it depended on my having children, which wasn't guaranteed. But it was perhaps the first time she had acknowledged, even indirectly, the inherent unfairness of the original arrangement. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The healing process had been painful at first, like setting a broken bone so it could mend properly. The initial confrontation, the estrangement, the establishment of boundaries all had hurt acutely. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, a new equilibrium had formed. I no longer needed my parents' approval to validate my worth. I no longer compared myself to Sophia or measured my life against hers. I had built something of my own, a home, a career, a community of friends, a sense of self that existed independently of my family role. The relationship with my family would never be perfect. My parents would likely never fully acknowledge the favoritism that had shaped our family dynamic, nor offer the complete apology I had once thought essential. Sophia would always have advantages I didn't, financial and emotional. The wounds of the past wouldn't magically disappear. But perhaps complete healing didn't require perfect justice or full recognition. Perhaps it was enough to find peace within myself, to create boundaries that protected my well-being, to accept what my family could give while no longer expecting what they couldn't. I had learned to stand my ground, to value myself, even when others didn't, to build a life that reflected my own priorities rather than seeking external validation. These were lessons worth the pain they had cost, gifts I would carry forward, regardless of how my family relationships evolved. As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one above the city skyline, I felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. The journey wasn't over. My family would always be my family, with all the complexity that entailed, but I had found my way home to myself. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to protect your self-worth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember, you deserve to be valued, not despite your independence and success, but because of it. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to create the life you deserve, even when it means making difficult choices.